Thank you very much for joining and to making this time for shows in Bitcoin.
My pleasure.
It's a huge pleasure also on my end. I'd like first to ask you, who is Giacomo Zucco? Aside from the fact that Mir Serena Liponi has already been my guest during the first lockdown, and you're her husband.
So that's my first role, of course. I'm best known as the husband of Mir, but also I have some independent visibility a little bit as mostly right now educator consultant in the Bitcoin field. I've been an entrepreneur for a while. I've started a few startups, including a very quite big consulting firm, but then recently I'm mostly freelance and an educator and a consultant. There is still some company I have shares of, but I'm not that big into entrepreneurship anymore. I'm standing a little bit more on the sidelines, so I have more time for the family, more time to study and um, to follow Bitcoin development. I have formal education in physics, and before that I have classical studies because I wanted to be an archaeologist. And well, I think that's mostly all. Yeah, so the purpose is mostly twofold or threefold actually. The first reason for this website is to gather the material. So if you go on the second page, which is articles and videos, I started to put on all the articles that are written and the videos. There are still a lot missing. So as you can see, there are very few of them. But I just started from a random numbers, and then I will slowly put on everything, including this very podcast. So everything that I've done, I will put it here so that people can have an easy way to gather all the material. I have so I'm a little bit controversial, so it's not impossible that I may be banned from Twitter, from YouTube. Eventually, I have been suspended a few times. So having a single place where people can find me out is better than just having everything scattered around on Twitter or social network, Reddit, and YouTube. Then in the second link, in the second page, it's upcoming events. I don't think I think you will not find anything scheduled now, but like probably in 2 weeks, I will schedule the first cycles of seminars running Bitcoin of November. And then every time I have like a public speech or something live, I will put it here so that people can follow. And then there is a page which is Book My Time, which it was necessary because a lot of people was asking me for not just podcasts like now, but also interviews, sometimes lessons, private consulting. And so I just said, I'm very bad at time management. So if I try to manage manually everything, I will never do anything at all. And also I'm starting to use some, I mean, when you have too much demand and too few supply or something, in this case, my time, the best way to arrange is basically put a price on things, because as long as we do everything for free, there is no incentives for us to make it sustainable, to make it, there's no information to make it sustainable. And there is a leader responsibilization of me and on the counterparty. So the idea is, what the hell, let's do it for a price. Of course, it's not commerce, because otherwise I will have to manage bureaucracy and taxation. This is just a donation. So it's a booking time with a donation mechanism attached to it, which is probably legally a little bit original, but we will see with my lawyers what will happen about this. So this is the website in general. So as you said, I've become a maximalist. When I started following Bitcoin in 2012, I was a little bit skeptical at the beginning about Bitcoin. Then during 2012, I got radicalized. I got convinced about Bitcoin. And so for a while, I was the opposite of skeptical. Since Bitcoin had taken down all my intellectual defenses, I was starting to become a little bit naive, a little bit gullible. So I was basically believing in everything. So for 2 years, I was like trying to issue systems like blockchain tracking and assets on Ripple. And I was following basically everything going on. even stupid altcoins like Prime Coin, Feather. I was following any kind of shit going around the ecosystem because basically that's the typical reaction of many people that were basically surprised by Bitcoin and said, if Bitcoin is possible, everything else is possible. After a while, though, I started studying more, I started experimenting more, and I reestablished some kind of skepticism, some kind of critical spirit. And so now I'm more focused on what I do. And as you said, I only do Bitcoin stuff, which is already Bitcoin may seem a little thing, a part of the so-called blockchain hype or crypto hype. But even just Bitcoin is an infinite rabbit hole with a lot of stuff, because in Bitcoin I can do financial consulting, I can discuss asset classes with the financial the correlation. I can discuss saving. I can discuss monetary policies, or I can discuss basically cryptography, security, infosec, cold storage schemes, or I can discuss integration with timestamping application, Lightning Network payments. So we can discuss a lot of stuff within Bitcoin. Of course, as you can imagine, being maximalist, so being focused on Bitcoin, is reducing the overall target that I could reach for education. But on the other hand, is also increasing the perceived quality, because you can find a lot of people right now, since a few years, since the bubble of 2017 at least, you can find hundreds of people that will present themselves as blockchain experts, even people from banking industries, or as crypto experts. So every wannabe trader will present himself as a crypto expert. So there is plenty, there is an oversupply of people following this generic hype. So by being focused on something specific, I reduce my target overall, but I also increase the perception of quality. So overall, I think it's balanced. Of course, it's difficult because it's something so new that people don't have the tools to distinguish who is more reliable, who is more trustworthy, who is more competent, because it's something new and something very interdisciplinary. So the only way that you have to emerge and to basically stand out is to wait for time to be a gentleman, and to clarify the distinction between people that made all the wrong prediction and all the falsified claims about everything, and people that remain more realistic and try to stay on something which is doable and something which is provable, or anyway probable, at least.
Probable. Okay. And having said probable, the first I remind myself about technician whose name starts with P, and this is Peter Todd. And I'm thinking about also Saifedean Ammous, which are two people with very different scopes, if I can say. And I'm not sure myself that I'm always able to understand. So Saifedean is pure economics, while Peter Todd, and let's say not only Saifedean and Peter Todd, but in general, who to listen first when we're talking about Bitcoin, if I'm not that good technically and I'm not an economist.
Yeah, I think the only way to really understand, to understand the best possible way the phenomenon going on, is to listen to both. The two examples that you made are very good, because they're completely orthogonal. They have very small overlap. One is a guy with education in physics and in computer science and in electronics and in fine arts, and is mostly an engineer. So Peter Todd is an engineer, a nerd, a computer guy basically, and he's very focused on privacy, infosec, these kind of things. He understands monetary policy, but it's not his focus. It's not even his passion. He is big on infosec, obsec, and an implication of the of privacy tools. While Saifedean Ammous is the total opposite. He understands enough about the technical things of Bitcoin enough to, for example, follow the right engineers and not follow for for the scammers and for the frauds, but is not really into technical details. His focus is the monetary effects of Bitcoin as a monetary system. So Saifedean, for example, will tell you that he's not really that interested in privacy because he thinks that the monetary implication of Bitcoin will basically overshadow the privacy application. I'm a little bit in between. Probably I'm more technical than Saifedean, for example, and I'm way less technical and more economically minded than Peter. I actually think that possibly it's not really just these two polarization, but Bitcoin is very multidisciplinary. There is a lot of stuff, but maybe you can depict the space of the competences and the skills and of interests in a triangle, because you have the political side of Bitcoin, which is not just about economics and monetary policy. It's also about, you know, the Silk Road, Ross Ulbricht, WikiLeaks, which is something which doesn't directly connect with inflation and monetary policy. So you have a political activism, especially in the libertarian sense. So you have people quoting Rothbard, people quoting Bastiat, people quoting Spooner or Spencer or other American anarchists. And so you have the activism scene. Then you have the economic monetary knowledge. So you have people studying the history of money, and most of them, they are not maybe libertarian. For example, Nick Szabo is a guy that studied money, collectibles, a lot of stuff, but politically is very right wing and not at all, well, not really libertarian. For on the other extreme, you have a few cypherpunks that are actually very socialist leaning, very left wing leaning. They are not interested in capitalism and saving and financial market. They just want privacy and transparency. So there are people closer to, I don't know, the Pirate Party or some parts of WikiLeaks. So you have the monetary experts, the political activists, and then you have the engineers. So the guys that are mostly interested in math, computer science, cryptography, and open source development. And some of these guys have different kind of mindsets in terms of politics or of monetary theory. Of course, if you stay in Bitcoin, usually you are not really just in these three, in the center of these three extremes, but you also are part of some subset. For example, the subset that overlaps between economic knowledge, monetary knowledge, and political activism is usually called the Austrian economics, like Saifedean, for example. And the subset of people that are engineers, expert engineers, but also interested in privacy as a political tool is, for example, the cypherpunks like Adam Beck, Peter Todd himself, or Julian Assange himself. So the cypherpunk part. And then there is of course, the last overlap between monetary policies and engineering, which is the fintech world with the fintech innovation more in general. So as you can see, it's a very complex picture. And I think that if you just follow one of the extremes, you may lose the view on something else. It's probably best to understand the big picture and to follow the best experts in every part of Bitcoin. And especially interesting when they disagree with each other. It doesn't happen always, but it does happen often that you can find Luke Dasher disagreeing with Gregory Maxwell, disagreeing with Peter Todd in a technical sense, or Saifedean Ammous disagreeing with Eric Bosquill, disagreeing with other economic experts, or Nick Szabo going in both fields and arguing with both, or well, you can find a lot of examples actually. So my suggestion would be don't use just one oracle, but let's take plenty of oracles from the whole multidisciplinary sides of this and faces of this coin. No, unfortunately, there is not a deterministic way to get it, because every kind of deterministic metric in a social game like trust, a deterministic metric can be just abused. So if you say every good guy is on this website and everybody agrees with me, then this website becomes a centralization point, and everything a bad guy has to do is to buy or acquire or hack or legally confiscate this website to compromise Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is decentralized not just in the technical sense as a network of computers, as a software platform, but it's also decentralized as a trust network. There is not one developer that can speak for Bitcoin. There is a group of developers that manage the GitHub repository, and around that repository there is a lot of trust, of course, because many of us, we run maybe the new Bitcoin Core version without personally reviewing everything, so there is a lot of trust. But as soon as they start behaving strange, or as soon as something fishy emerges, we just stop upgrading, and our node is not affected by GitHub anymore. We can find another version of Bitcoin on another repository and just stick with the older version, or just trust another groups of developers. So it's not really about trusting a specific group or website. Of course, there are a few, we can call it heuristics. So they are not rules. You cannot give these rules 100% of accuracy, but you can use it as a general suggestion. For example, companies that use technical names inside the name of the company, with few exceptions, tend to be suspicious. For example, if you imagine during the internet bubble, a company called Internet is probably a little bit pretentious. So it's also, if you are a bad actor, if you have a bad guy, and you are trying to basically hijack the hype, you will probably try to buy or fund a company with that kind of name. So I think it's not by chance that if you go on bitcoin.com, that website is mostly not about Bitcoin. It's about an altcoin, which is Bitcoin Cash, and is also right now is the altcoin is that Bitcoin Cash is dying. So probably they are just stepping down the rhetoric a little bit. But there was a moment in time in which, when you went to bitcoin.com, which one could think is the more natural thing for a newbie to go to. Mm-hmm. So you go on bitcoin.com, you click buy Bitcoin, and you put an address, and actually the website was selling you Bitcoin Cash instead of Bitcoin, but calling it Bitcoin, and calling Bitcoin Bitcoin Core, which is actually the name of the implementation of the node software, not the name of the coin. So there was an explicit fraud basically going on the most obvious bitcoin.com website. And even bitcoin.org, which is better, if you go on bitcoin.org, you don't find misleading attempts to sell you an altcoin like in bitcoin.com. But bitcoin.org is managed by people that, for example, you can still find a lot of wrong claims on bitcoin.org. And especially there is the selection of wallets that you can find. There are absolutely arbitrary choices. There have been a lot of fights on the managers of the maintainers of bitcoin.org that decided to exclude some wallets for random reasons. And so there is no official place to go. There is just a degree of things. I was saying that using the technical term as a name of a company is a bad indicator. And this is in general true. For example, also blockchain.info, blockchain.com is another company that was basically instrumental into organizing an attack against Bitcoin. And Coinbase, which is another technical term, the Coinbase is the initial transaction in every block that generates the new block subsidy. So the Coinbase is a technical term, and the Coinbase company is indeed another bad actor that organized in 2000, a few years ago, organized an attack against Bitcoin known as the New York Agreement, and also is a company which did very bad things about privacy, selling private information of the user to shady third parties, and acquiring an espionage team from Italy to violate basically the privacy of the user. So it's the definition of a bad actor, but it's also a very famous exchange, so a lot of people will go there. So this is an heuristic. The second heuristic would be to slow down, to have a low time preference. So that means slow down, check everything, wait, compare the statements, compare the reaction, try to understand, study before investing. Usually that's always a good suggestion, but in Bitcoin particularly, before you can really be low risk, you have to understand what's going on, and you will take time. I can send people to, for example, there are very few websites for newbies like 21 lessons and Bitcoin resources by their Gigi. So you can find, you Google Bitcoin resources or 21 lessons. There are very good websites with a lot of collections of resources. Or you go to Nakamoto Institute. The Nakamoto Institute, there is a lot of great articles about everything. So there are good resources, but you shouldn't trust me about good resources, because otherwise I become a single point of failure. So you have to compare, wait some time, remember, understand who is lying and who was saying something and now is saying something else, and use an adversarial mindset, because Bitcoin has strong implications on the world monetary policy, commerce, censorship. So everything, and also finance, because it's also a transfer of wealth. It's happening between fiat and Bitcoin. So everything which is at the center of so many interests is necessarily at the center of many attempts to hijack and free ride and mislead people. So we have to be very careful and very active. Bitcoin is not for lazy people, unfortunately, not yet. When Bitcoin will be for lazy people, that will happen, but it will not be so interesting anymore. It will be after Bitcoin already won, then it will be easy, but not disruptive anymore. I think that Bitcoin may become more boring in our lifetime, but I'm not sure, of course. But every dynamic that is having something to do with Bitcoin's reason to be. So censorship, financial censorship, is accelerating. A few years ago, we were talking about WikiLeaks being censored. Now we're talking about every single guy who's posting something which is not socially cool on the internet. It will be deplatformed, and his PayPal account will be blocked, and his Patreon account will be blocked. So now every kind of disalignment to some kind of mainstream culture will get you immediately banned or excluded from payment. And the number of people without a KYC identity is basically at the all-time high compared to as a function of the global population. And the restriction of on cash means that it's even harder and harder to do transaction without asking please to your bank to allow you to do your transaction with your money. So everything that people will, and so privacy is terrible on the network right now. There are a lot of leaks of private information of people, but from websites. So everything that you buy online with credit cards can be leaked in the public. So and of course monetary policy. Bitcoin was conceived also as a way to resist monetary manipulation and inflation. And right now we have an historical peak of manipulation and inflation of the monetary base. You see what the Federal Reserve is doing and what the European Central Bank is also just about to do. So it's crazy. It's all-time high. So I think that it's very unlikely that Bitcoin will take many years to do what he has to do, because everything else is accelerating. So I would be very surprised to get old and die without Bitcoin having done some of his part, at the macroscopic level. So exchanges have two big advantages. One, I think for a while they are inevitable, because even if you can do decentralized exchange from the Bitcoin point of view, you can do cool stuff with atomic swap and stuff like that. So Bitcoin doesn't need exchanges, but fiat does. If you have a lot of wealth in fiat and you want to transfer this wealth from fiat to Bitcoin, individually, you can do that outside of exchanges, just asking people and going with cash and moving cash. I mean, it's something that you can do, and it's probably the safer way to go right now, because then you don't link your identity to those coins, and so you're safer even from personal attacks or kidnappings and stuff. So you can bypass exchange personally, but not everybody can. The mass of money which is pushing to enter in Bitcoin does need an efficient, centralized system of clearing for fiat. Again, the centralization is not necessary for Bitcoin part, but for the fiat part it is. So when all the wealth is already in Bitcoin, we don't need exchanges anymore. But for the bridging, for the migration, we need that. So Bitcoin centralized exchanges are not going away. Even if regulators will try to shut them down, there will be some of those will be shut down. Some of those will close down with all the money inside, creating a lot of losses. But somewhere in some jurisdiction with some condition, some Bitcoin exchange will remain open. So it's a business that I don't see being disrupted for many, many years. Second, it's one of the few business on Bitcoin that can be profitable, actually. It can be really profitable because since you must centralize half of the business because you need somebody to accept fiat, escrow fiat, and be custodian of fiat. Even if you do an exchange which is non-custodial on the Bitcoin side, like HODL, which is very good. You don't have Bitcoin custodianship, but you still have the fiat custodianship. So since there is decentralization, there is a profit. And basically, I would say that hardware companies and exchanges are the only company which are making sustainable and scalable profit in the last years. So if you want to work somewhere, if you work in an exchange, probably they will have money to pay you. If you work on for some other projects, probably they will not have money to pay you. So maybe they have because they're just putting a lot of coins as a donation to, I mean, unless you find an entrepreneur that is just giving back to the community, so they do not care for profits and they're just putting there as a donation, then they can pay you. But it's not sustainable. There is not a sustainable profit revenue model. Like what I do, which is consultancy, it's probably sustainable, but for example, it's not scalable. You cannot really create a scalable business model on top of education because you need specialized professor teachers. It's very difficult to scale, and it's basically time material as a model, so it's very difficult to scale. So exchanges are probably a good place to find jobs. Many people that I know are basically finding jobs at exchanges. Of course, the best thing to go Bitcoin only will be to target those exchanges that are Bitcoin only. There are quite a few of them right now. The most famous is of course Cash App in the USA, but then you can find if you can go on Google and you search Bitcoin only and you find the bitcoinonly.org, I think, a web page with all the businesses that are Bitcoin only. You go on buy Bitcoin or trading and exchange, and you will find all the exchanges that are Bitcoin only. And that's probably a good way. I think that, for example, Cash App is my favorite exchange when we talk about shitcoins and scams, because it's very focused on Bitcoin. So you put fiat inside and you take Bitcoin, which I think is the real deal. But everything else is basically gambling. I have nothing against gambling. I mean, everybody can get make money as they want, as long as they don't hurt others. Everybody can play whatever game they want, but gambling is not a very fascinating business for me. So Cash App is better. But for example, if I have to tell you about the best exchange as long as KYC resistance is security against KYC security all, then it's HODL, which is not Bitcoin only, because I think they had Litecoin and they never removed it. I don't know if they removed it or not. So it's not strictly Bitcoin only, but I don't care because it's a great exchange because there is no KYC. If I have to talk about the exchange which is promoting the best technological practices, I think that Bitfinex is the most interesting right now because they have Lightning Network deposit, Lightning Network withdrawal. They have liquid for USD Tether. They have a lot of it. They are funding studies in open test stamps through Marshall for Peter Todd, RGB, Lightspeed, a lot of stuff there, and Bitcoin development kit by Alekos Fellini, Magical Wallet. So they're funding a lot of research. So there are few, but they're not Bitcoin only. There are a lot of shitcoins on Bitfinex. So Bitcoin only is not the only metric that I will use. It's one of the metric, because when you're Bitcoin only, I think that you can give more credit to the focus of the team and to the or integrity of the team, but it's not the only metric that you can use. With caution, meaning that I know the people behind Tether, so I trust them personally, but you cannot trust the model from the security point of view blindly. You have to think that Tether is an aggressive experiment anyway. It's a very useful experiment, and now I will tell you why I think it's useful, but it's also very aggressive, and so it exists because the people behind it are very, very good at legal arbitrage and innovation. They run very, very fast, and so the regulators are still not catching up with them because they're very fast and very financially creative, I would say, and also they have a strong security mindset, and so I think they're very good professionals. So what is the point of Tether for me? From a point of view of the trust model, Tether is just like PayPal. You give $1 to a company, they will keep the dollar, and if the company disappears, your dollar has gone. So there is no difference there in a way. You're just trusting a centralized entity. But using a decentralized or a set of decentralized or semi-decentralized or pseudo-decentralized platform to track the token, they can actually do legal arbitrage in a very interesting way. So you go to the Tether company, you do KYC AML, you're completely spied, tracked, and you have no privacy at all, and you buy $100 of USD Tether, USD dollar. Then you have this stuff, but you have it on chain. Now you basically exchange on a crypto-only exchange with very weak KYC policies, or on top of some kind of decentralized protocol like Bisq or otherwise, or on the Ethereum stuff like Uniswap if you can find liquidity. And so you trade outside the KYC system. Then somebody that will receive that Tether will go back to Tether. They will have to KYC AML, and they will redeem the dollars in their bank account. So the primary market, the market of the people who acquired Tether from the company and who redeemed Tether to the company, they are completely tracked. So they have no privacy, no fungibility. But all the secondary market, all the people that exchanged Tether with Bitcoin in the secondary market, they basically maintain a high level of privacy and contribute to some of the fungibility of the fiat Bitcoin exchange. So that's an important role. So why don't you just use a database for that? Well, for the simple reason that if the regulator goes to the Tether company and says, you should take this Tether and move it to the other account because we say so, if it was a private database, Tether would be forced to answer, okay. With being an external protocol, an external open protocol, they cannot really answer no, but they can put a lot of resistance to that. For example, they can say, okay, we can blacklist this stuff, but we cannot move them. So you cannot ask us to move this token from this account to this other account because we don't control Ethereum, Tron, Liquid, Omni, RGB. These are just external platform, external standards. So we don't have control. So this is an interesting point. RGB, which is something we are working on with Tether and for Tether, will be, in my opinion, especially interesting because with RGB, you cannot even blacklist. If they ask Tether, you should blacklist this address, they will be able to truthfully answer, sorry, we can't because we cannot even see where the tokens are. When people will come back to us with RGB Tether to change back, we will ask them to KYC. But right now, we don't know where the tokens are because we cannot see them on the blockchain. So that's an opportunity for regulatory arbitrage. So this, I think, is the main use case. It's not a use case that will last forever. I think it will last for a few years because after a while, the regulators will just stop companies like Tether entirely if they want, or it will become useless because everybody will be in Bitcoin. So in the long run, I don't think there will be a role for this kind of machineries. But in the short run, it can be very, very useful. So that kind of tokens, I think, can be useful. The second kind of token that I think would be useful, they are basically digital collectibles. So you know that you can have collectibles even of things that are easy to reproduce. If you buy a comic which is like a special edition of economy. It's very easy to just copy the pages with high resolution and have an identical product. It's not like Picasso, where it's difficult to replicate. A comic is easy to replicate. But since you know that this is not a sanctioned original version signed by the author, then the price is less because it's a collectible thing. The value is the scarcity itself. So you can do this on physical stuff, but until now you couldn't do this on digital stuff, because the only way you can pass properties, you can maintain scarcity, is with the central party. So if you have, for example, let's imagine the football player cards as collectible, or Magic the Gathering, or whatever. If they only, so the interesting thing about collectibles, like post stamps and stuff like that, is that even when the issuer has disappeared since 20 years or 200 years, the collectible is still valuable. You can find now a coin issued by Napoleon III, and there is no King of France anymore, but the coin is still there. And you can find a post stamp of a government that doesn't, or Yugoslavia, and the post stamp is there, and Yugoslavia is not. So there is the resistance of the collectible after the issuer. But if you use a centralized system like a database, it's more efficient, it's fine. But if you use that, when the issuer disappears, for example, they close down the company, your collectible disappears. While if you use the decentralized token, like in a platform that can survive, which in my opinion is not stuff like Ethereum and so on, but for example, maybe Counterparty, RGB, they could be able to survive a long time. So in this case, you can actually have a digital collectible. And then there is another function of tokens, which is decentralizing things just because everybody else decentralized things. So this is a question of network effect. Imagine to be in 1995 and you have to do a closed, controlled, permissioned network for your company. You don't use the internet because you want the opposite. The internet is permissionless, open. You want something closed, controlled, so you will use a mainframe. But if you have to do the same thing in 2015, now you still want something closed, controlled, but since everybody else in the world is using the internet as an open standard, it's less expensive to just go with what everything else, go with what everybody else is doing. So use the internet and then create a closed portal on top of the open internet. So if you imagine a world where everybody is using Bitcoin, so everybody is using a Bitcoin hardware wallet, they are already familiar with Bitcoin address, with Bitcoin QR code, they have Bitcoin private keys, they have Bitcoin management tools, they have code-based practices. In this case, if you issue something which is completely centralized, like for example, air miles or a minute or phones of airtime in a telephone, or I don't know, Starbucks coffee points, everything you want to issue, if everybody else is using these open standards, maybe it's less expensive to use that. But this would be the last use case for token. So right now, I think that 99.9% of the token use case that I've seen are absolute nonsense. First of all, the interesting thing about PayPal is the history of the company. So the first phase of PayPal was actually an attempt to do something like Bitcoin, but in a centralized way. The company was called X.com back then, and it was funded by Elon Musk and Peter Thiel. And you can find still interviews of Peter Thiel saying that X.com will be a new monetary system, that when citizens use cash or credit card in face-to-face, they will have to use the money of the country they are in. But when they are on the internet, they are not anymore American citizens or Italian citizens or Swiss citizens or Bulgarian citizens. They are citizens of the network. So now they will always use X.com without any kind of border of unit change of central banks. So the ambition of PayPal, of X.com, was to create a new money independent from central banks without international exchanges, only depending on one email address, without paperwork, without regulation, without control. So a free internet money, a magic internet money, which is something that basically Bitcoin is doing in a way. Then they were stopped by regulation. So the regulators say, no, you can't. And they put other attempts like that in jail, like Liberty Reserve and Gold. And so PayPal just became a normal payment system on top of fiat. So it's digital, but it's easy, it's has a good UX, but basically to use it, you have to have a bank account. You have to do all the bureaucracy of the bank account, and you will use fiat with the same kind of devaluation and manipulation of fiat because it's still fiat. There is nothing new, nothing digital native, nothing internet native. So the history of PayPal starts with an attempt to do something like Bitcoin, then it fails, then it becomes something else. And then you have basically the CEO of PayPal a few years ago going absolutely berserk against Bitcoin, like saying Bitcoin is evil, Bitcoin, we will stop Bitcoin, Bitcoin is something terrible. And now they're just adapting to Bitcoin. So you see
The same CEO or with another CEO? With the same CEO.
Well, so the most aggressive declaration were not from the current CEO. They were from I think it was the CTO or something. I will have to find back. But even the current CEO, well, I think you can reasonably, I'm reasonably certain you can find a lot of statements that are very, very different from the statement of today. So very, very negative. So now you see this evolution of narrative. Of course, PayPal could be interesting because they have a lot of clients, so they can give some exposition to Bitcoin. But in the end, what Bitcoin is going to accomplish is so big that that PayPal, with all these users, it's really something small in comparison. Bitcoin as a market cap is small, as a user base is small, but as a potential to change the world, it's just like it's like taking the internet in the 80s with very few thousands, very few hundreds of thousands of users around the world. And you compare that with what Microsoft is doing with CompuServe. Microsoft could be cool, but the internet will change the world forever. It will change the world with everything, like memes, the fake news, the Russian boats, the Arab Springs, WikiLeaks, and well, the other is just a company with a product. It can be bigger right now, but eventually PayPal is irrelevant, while Bitcoin, if it works, is very, very relevant. So the last thing to say is that, in a way, I prefer that. So I think there are two classes of Bitcoin users. There are Bitcoin users that need Bitcoin really as an instrument to be censorship resistant and to be private on the internet, stuff like that. These people, they will need to learn to manage private keys, to run a full node, to coin join their coins, to manage privacy. Then there are other class of users. They don't care about the use case of Bitcoin directly. They just want to speculate on Bitcoin price. So they don't care for privacy because maybe they're just normal investors, rich people with a lot of political connection with lawyers and stuff. They just want to take the phone and say, dear bank, buy me a few Apple shares, some oil and some Bitcoin and some Canadian dollars. And they don't care for privacy, address management, fees, on-chain fees, Lightning Network. They just want to use a trusted counterparty. So right now, there is this strange confusion in which users of the second kind are basically invading the field of the first kind. So you find companies that say, oh, you know, we cannot do privacy correctly because we are for newbies. So we are not for hardcore Bitcoiners. We are just for normal people who want to be regulatory compliance. So we will do KYC, which is, I think it's a worst of two worlds, because on one side you have a fake security. So when you use PayPal, you know that PayPal is centralized, that you know that PayPal can take all your money tomorrow. You know that you're just trusting somebody, that there will be bureaucracy, paperwork. When you're using a wallet, so let's assume, for example, a closed source Bitcoin wallet, I don't know, I don't want to do names, but whatever. A closed source Bitcoin wallet is stupid because you have the same security of PayPal basically, because they can take all your money if you are scamming you or if you are legally requested to, and you cannot avoid it. But you feel like you are actually using Bitcoin, but maybe you are reusing addresses, consolidating UTXO, not running a full node, not conjoining. So you have terrible trust model, terrible security, terrible privacy, and you don't know. So you are still trusting, but you think that you're not trusting. So in a way, I think that the users that cannot become sovereign, they are better off trusting established old style companies instead of these shady crypto companies that try to stay in between, but actually they don't give you the benefits of both worlds. They give you the problems of both worlds. For example, in a closed source wallet, you will spend fees and consume on-chain space, just like a real Bitcoin wallet, but you will be completely trust-based like PayPal. So just use PayPal.
Okay, thank you, Giacomo. And you have mentioned several companies also currently they've started buying lots of Bitcoins like MicroStrategy, MicroSaver, so everybody knows. I'm not sure who wants to have privacy, obviously not these guys. But behind, let's say, that's what I've heard. I'm listening to all these CEOs and the decision makers to go into Bitcoin. All of them, the majority of them are saying that they do it because of the community, because Bitcoin has a very, very strong community behind. And I'm really curious to know, how are you keeping the community engaged and let's say, your colleagues and people like you? What is that thing that you're doing for the community?
Well, community is a strange word because it indicates a lot of different stuff. In small projects like I don't know, a single video game or a single browser, the community is something very compact and very easy to describe. In Bitcoin, being the infinite the rabbit hole that we discussed with a lot of these interdisciplinary things, actually the community is just a placeholder. The word community is a placeholder for a network of very different communities. So you have the community of the traders that includes some Bitcoiners and some shitcoiners and some no coiners. They're just making money. You have the community of the developers, which includes some fintech developers, some Tor developers, some Bitcoin. They're just developing software. There's a community of the agorists, cypherpunk liberty fighters. They are building tools to avoid regulation and avoid control and look for freedom. So these people are not necessarily overlapped. There are a few communities that sometimes they are even against each other. For example, the community which is focused on the price and monetary policy will be less sensitive about privacy, and maybe they will say, don't bother with privacy because the only point is number go up. And the other community will say, well, number go up doesn't help you if they confiscate you, so you should always be super private. So there is a lot of conflict about these visions, and not only between Bitcoin and all the shitcoins, or between Bitcoin and the old world, but also within Bitcoin there are a lot of sensibilities. So I think that when these people, like when Saylor and others talks about Bitcoin community, the interesting thing is not the community as a thing, but the absence of the community as a monolithic thing. There is not a community that can change Bitcoin, which is very, very good. There are a lot of small communities that are advancing Bitcoin in their specific interests and in their regards, and they are conflicting, and they are diversified, they are diversified, they are not colluding on a single specific goal, and they are not in coordinated control. So if you want to actually say, if you want to hijack the community of Bitcoin, you can't, simply because there is not one single monolithic community. So what I'm doing is to for myself, for example, I spent this year to build a network of people I trust, and that became a community because then pre lockdown we were seeing each other often, we were trusting each other on a personal level, so we made a lot of friends. So now there is a community of people that I'm friend with that are all working for Bitcoin or with Bitcoin or using Bitcoin somehow. They are not. I have a lot of friends in Bitcoin that actually can't stand each other. So I know I have friends. There are the CoinJoin wars and the hardware wallets wars, and maybe I'm close friend with Rodolfo Novak that will be super mad at somebody else, and there are a lot of crossed hates, and some of them are just funny and just playful. Some of them are serious, and there is a lot of conflict, which is good. I think that what Sailor was mentioning is the strong reaction of the community as an immune system to unwanted change. The community is not something that can control Bitcoin, but it's something that when somebody else tries to control Bitcoin will rise as an antibody reaction, as an immune reaction of a body, and will kill the virus instantly, or very, very soon anyway. So it's more like a network of independent realities that when there is something exogenous that is trying to pervert Bitcoin, will very, very fast and very, very effectively react, rejecting the intruder, basically.